All right, everybody, welcome today. Welcome back to Sustainable Design Masterclass. I'm Raleigh Latham, joined here by the one and only amazing plant pathology scientist, Dr. Cindy Morris. I gotta pump you. I gotta show your awesome credentials. She's a fantastic plant researcher, and if you look at her research gate, her work that expands the depth of plant pathology and soil biology and relating to rainfall. It's really incredible, and it really is expansive and actionable. And so I really wanted to bring her back today to give her perspective on how to restore soils, how to, and the role that we have in restoring soil biology and ecology. And this is all actionable stuff, the relations of plants and soil biology and restoring ecology. And so she's going to have a really awesome, expansive webinar today on her perspective on that, how we got to the point where we've destroyed our soils, and how we can find our way out of it. So I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Morris, and we'll get started today.
Okay, well, thank you, Raleigh, and thanks for the invitation. So,
Got it.
um, recently you asked me, could I do another seminar? And I said, well, no and yes. I do have things I want to say, and the audience is captive. And what I learned from the last seminar when I did the water stories one is how much passion and motivation that the participants have to do restoration work, be it for the water cycle, be it for soils. And so my real objective today is to motivate you to continue and tell you why what you're doing is important this time for soil. So a disclaimer, I am not a soil scientist, and there's tons of things I'm going to say today that I learned in preparing in asking these questions recently. But it's really critical, and I hope you feel really boosted to try to continue your own works on managing soil quality. So I'm talking to you about the importance of your work as guardians of soil quality in the overall health of our biosphere. So I'm going to start with this context about oneness. This oneness is certainly a motivating factor for many of us because we feel that most everything is connected. But more recently, or over the years, these ideas of oneness of social and environmental phenomena on Earth have really come to front stage for different reasons. Okay. And so 1945, one world or none. Okay. Look at the authors. One of
Oh,
them is
Cindy,
Albert.
are you start for some? We don't see your slide deck, or have you
Oops.
started it yet? Okay.
Restart it again. Do
Yeah,
you
yeah,
see
we
oneness of social? Wait a minute. Sorry.
no problem. Let's
Do you see it now?
not yet. We just see your screen.
You
I
see
mean,
my, do you
we
see
just my
my,
bad. We just see your webcam. We don't see your screen yet.
oh, okay, wait. So you don't see, I did
We
share
haven't
again, right?
started. Yeah, if you click the share
Oh,
button down below.
maybe I didn't share. That's what I didn't do. Okay. Maybe this time I didn't share. Okay. So, I think we'll see that. Okay, wait. I'm sorry. Let's try again.
No problem.
Now, do you see?
It's just loading. There we go. Now we
Okay,
see
and
it.
do you see it
Yep.
advance?
Yep. We got it.
Okay, so there we are. So we're in this idea of oneness.
Okay,
And
sweet.
yeah, you see that now? Okay, so one of these ideas of oneness, 1945, one world or none. And you see the authors here, one of them is Albert Einstein. So you can imagine that's about the atomic bomb. Suddenly we realize that we have technology that can destroy everybody. So we're all part of one world, right? Another one was when the term global village was coined, 1994. And that was before the power of the internet, people started understanding how media really connected people, and we all sort of knew about the same things, and we became this global village, a sort of oneness. And then very recently, we have this more interesting phenomenon about one world or none, which I don't know if the authors of this 2021 article know about the 1945 one, but this one world or none is about how psychological problems are also social phenomena that are contagious. And they're talking about the proliferation of people who believe in conspiracies and untruths, okay? And that this is like a real psychosociological phenomena that spread. So these are things about how we're all connected. And so I'm talking about this to put this idea in context about One Health, because it's another one of these ideas about how everything is interconnected, the health of everything is interconnected. And the modern concept of One Health, that's getting a lot of lip service, started in about 2004 with this seminar about veterinary medicine. And then again, there was a seminar in 2019 where people specified it. And the real concern was these diseases that came out of the environment that were transmitted to humans, but had environmental reservoirs. And so these are the things, you know about. HIV, AIDS was one of the first ones. Okay. Then the most recent one is COVID. Right. So there's phenomena that where pathogens have other reservoirs and they can spill over because we have more connections between human environments and these animal environments. Either we're eating bush meat, or we're going to forests and hacking down more trees, or we are making steam stacks that spew Legionella out into the environment, or the avian flu, we're more and more contact with animals. So this is how these things are interconnected for the modern concept of One Health. And you'll understand why I'm talking about this, okay? So what does One Health mean? Basically, it's this unifying approach that aims to sustainably balance and optimize the health of people, animals, and ecosystems. So things are interdependent, different sectors need to collaborate, and we have to have some effective governance in order to implement this. And that's the basic idea. So in summary, One Health professes the interdependence of the health of all organisms through natural ecological processes and via human activities such as exploitation of planetary resources, trade, transportation, etc. And then it provides a systemic insight on disease epidemiology, and it militates for solutions that involved actors from different professions, sectors, and scientific disciplines. So we need to communicate with each other. So this is what the modern One Health initiative is about. Okay. But this is not really a new idea. All right. This is not really a new idea. If we go all the way back to the bottom of the slides, we can see that maybe when animals started to be domesticated about 10,000 years ago, people started observing animal behavior and they started seeing some connections. And as early as about 2,000 years BC, there were Babylonian laws that required the owners of rabid dogs to pay for the sickness caused to the victims of bites. They didn't understand about what caused disease, but they saw there was a link between dog bites and rabies. And so this idea about interconnectedness has some foundation, okay, about human, especially about human and animal health. But if we look at people who work on plant health, we don't talk about this at all. We really don't talk about it. And so one way to assess that is just to look at the publication rate about this subject of One Health, because it's getting a lot of attraction. So I looked at the numbers of publications 2022, 2023, and not even 1% of these publications about One Health actually talk about plant health. All right, for the modern thing. And so in fact, most of these One Health initiatives that are getting a lot of press, getting a lot of funding, are about human and animal health, and plants are just part of the environment. Okay. And they're not even perceived in terms of the ecological services they render, maybe except for a forest. But nobody has integrated how plant health is related to our health and animal health. Okay. So, my question was really for me as a plant pathologist, how come we don't understand this? Why isn't there a stronger link? So I want to propose some hypotheses that will help you, especially if you're as old as I am. Okay, you'll maybe understand this. So basically, my overall opinion is that we've been there, done that, and got the T-shirt. And this idea comes from the fact that if you look at, okay, we know about who read Silent Spring, right? Or I read in university Radical Agriculture or the Whole Earth Catalog. all of Rodale's publications on organic gardening, people explaining what went on in China for 40 centuries, where they recycled manures and they had basically sustainable agriculture in the context of their population. And so, I mean, we understand these concepts, it's just we have a different vocabulary. Okay, we have a different vocabulary. We understand how there are these links. Okay, and so where did these ideas that we have in agriculture come from? Okay, that there is this link. And so I need to get rid of this little bar on top of my, can I get rid of it? Because it's blocking my, okay. So anyway, um, so there has been a lot of knowledge about historical practices that were sustainable in their context. So, like I said, there's Franklin King, who was a professor at the University of Wisconsin, wrote in 1911 this nice history of agriculture, permanent agriculture in China, Korea, and Japan. 1947, Sir Albert Howard wrote a book about the soil and health, and it was really a holistic treatment. Okay, um, but modernization of agriculture. Uh, was what led us to understand the interdependence, the necessity for resources. Because as we started exploiting resources and the earth became like a resource for minerals and other things, and things were sent left and right, all these interconnections were broken. And that's when we started to see the dependence. And one thing that happened really important as modern agriculture started to expand in Europe and North America was that in 1830 to 1870, there was a huge soil fertility crisis. Yields plummeted, okay? And farmers and the world got really scared. And so what did they do? They tried to find fertilizers. And so before they really knew, so this is before we knew how to fix nitrogen out of the atmosphere, um, one thing that happened was like at the Battle of Waterloo, there thousands of horses and tens of thousands of horses and soldiers died. But today there's not one body left because right after the war, the British came and pillaged the bodies and transformed them into fertilizer. And there were even some ironic publications at the time by journalists saying that the body of a soldier was worth more as fertilizers than it was as a soldier. I mean, it's kind of sad. But they were taking especially the bones and grinding them up. Then in 1865, we had this Guano Act where the U.S. annexed over 100 different islands in the Pacific and the Atlantic, and many of them the U.S. still has a sort of authority over. And you have to wonder, like, why does America have all these little islands? Because they were sources of guano. So guano is, I mean, I'm sure you all know, it's those bird droppings that accumulate over hundreds and thousands of years. And so there was a whole industry, the guanopreneurs, they called them, like entrepreneur, came and just harvested the guano. Okay. And there were wars because of this. Okay. There was the Chinchilla Island Wars in South America about this. And there was the War of the Pacific, the Salpeter War over fertilizer taxes. So the world was pretty much intense about the fact that there was not enough soil fertility for our crops. And at the same time, you had important intellectuals that had very strong opinions about this. And so, Victor Hugo and Les Miserables, the book has multiple chapters, and there's a whole section on uh, the sewage that's going out in the Seine River being dumped into the oceans. And he writes in the book, I mean, this is a resource. Why are we throwing it away? Okay, so the sewage is more valuable than guano. Um, in Karl Marx's Das Kapital, he writes very clearly that land stewardship is an inalienable condition for the chain of human generations. 1867, extremely profound idea. And then we have Justus van Liebig, who's a soil chemist, and he didn't know which foot to dance on, but he understood that organic recycling resolves problems of urban pollution and also the problem of depletion of soil fertility. Okay, so this is the 1800s. People understood these things already. This predates by many years these modern ideas about One Health that concern animals, right, and humans. And then we have the Green Revolution. Okay, so I just want to remind you what the Green Revolution is. Green Revolution is that set of research technology transfer initiatives that took place between 1950 and the late 1960s that boosted agricultural production. And most of this started in the 1960s. So these, I'll explain to you what these technologies were, but wheat in particular, before we had these technologies, was very tall. And before harvest, it could lodge, so it'd fall over. And so that wheat was generally lost because the seeds would rot. Also, because the wheat was tall, you couldn't really fertilize it because it would get even taller and it increased the lodging problem. And also, there was this disease called stem rust, and that was leading to a lot of losses. So the technology that was adopted or that was developed resulted in high yielding varieties of cereals, especially dwarf wheat and rice. So these dwarf plants could then be fertilized, and they wouldn't grow the stems long. They just put that those nutrients into the seed. So this had massive consequences on Earth's population and resources, and this is the reason why we're going to have 9 billion people on the Earth. That is the reason why we're going to have a population of 9 billion people. But, okay, I used to teach in my class. At the time, people were starving. So, of course, anyone would have done the same thing, tried to find a solution for starvation. And because by reducing starvation and improving the opportunity for democracy, the scientist that did this, Norman Borlaug, who was a plant pathologist, won the Nobel Peace Prize, not a prize in science. He won the Peace Prize. Okay. And he also worked with the Rockefeller Institute to create a whole set of international research institutes that were positioned all over the world to help resolve the problems of poor farmers. So in dry areas, for livestock production, for rice improvement, for maize improvement, for wheat improvement. And their job was to work on local problems and then distribute the solutions all over the world. So this, I mean, technically, this sounds like a very positive thing, right? I mean, on this point of view. And so if you want to read the book, The Man Who Fed the World, it's absolutely passionate. So I mean, this is what I learned as a student, plant pathology, Norman Borlaug, we all said, we all were praising him. And I never questioned the fact that maybe there were people who at the time were saying, well, maybe we shouldn't be doing this, okay? Because it seems like the obvious solution when there's so much starvation. But in fact, he had a contemporary who we never hear about. His name is William Vogt. And he was an ecologist and an ornithologist. So he was seeing how this guano was being depleted because he was on these islands visiting them, studying the birds, and he just saw the guanopanergias coming, taking. And he saw the decline of birds that were source of guano. He was also, interestingly, director of the American Federation of Family Planning. Okay. So he understood about population growth. He was the secretary of the Conservation Foundation and a member of the International Union for Nature Conservancy. And he saw what Borlaug was doing and he said, this is going to lead to some bad stuff. We're going to have a population explosion. And this is all explained in this beautiful book, The Wizard and the Prophet by Charles Mann. Charles Mann is a journalist. The wizard is Norman Borlaug and the prophet is William Vogt. And so it's the battle. But of course, who won the battle, right? Not William Vogt. And reading this story, what does it make you think of? Makes us think of our modern prophet, who we all say is a naysayer, right? But because her message is dark, but her message is probably very true, Greta Thunberg, right? So she doesn't evoke, I mean, she evokes a lot of negative responses because her message is so dark, right? This was sort of probably how William Vogt was seen. Oh, come on, technology is going to solve the problems. Why are you such a naysayer, right? So this is a very interesting part of history. All right, so you can see that, we think biotechnology is going to save us. So, although modern One Health movement was formally initiated by the medical and veterinary communities, the oneness of health of all organisms was indeed recognized by crop production and soil specialists since the early 1900s, even before, okay? And these concepts were deployed to assure food sustainability and food security. Okay, so this is part of what the FAO did, et cetera, in these years. And I mean, these are things we talked about when I was a student at the university in the 1970s. There was starvation, and we needed to resolve it. And so here's just a quick summary of some of the ideas. So Rudolf Steiner, you might have heard of Steiner from the Montessori schools, right? Rudolf Steiner had lots of interesting ideas. So the soil is an organism. Walter Northburn, the farm is an organism. Albert Howard, soil life is a living bridge that supports the health of plants, livestock, and humans. And then the best one is Yves Balfour, who was the president of the Soil Society in 1946. 1946, this is well before One Health concepts. The health of soil, plant, animal, and man is one and indivisible. And then if you look at the declaration of the International Federation of Organic Agriculture Movements. So in the world, there are tons of movements for organic agriculture. And so there was an initiative to put them all together to a federation. They basically declare that organic agriculture should sustain and enhance the health of soil, plant, animal, and human, and planet as one and indivisible. So, I mean, I'm reading all this. I'm going like, why do we need a One Health movement? Why don't the veterinarians and the doctors just take our concepts? Well, because there's this big bridge between us. There's a big gap. So not a bridge. There's a big gap between us, and I don't think they understand anything about soils. This it comes down to that. So, to go back to why plant scientists aren't adopting the modern One Health movement is that I think without explicit mention of plant health and the importance of the ecosystem services rendered by plant production, modern One Health concepts and approaches are boring. Okay. They're much less diversified, they're less exciting, and less pertinent for sustainable plant production than the concepts we have in agroecology and all of the correlates of agroecology. Okay, we've been doing this for a much longer time, and it's fascinating and much more diverse than what the modern One Health movement proposes because it's so focused on just human and animal health and the plant. There's nothing really for the plant to do in this that we don't see. We don't understand that. Okay, so what kind of services do plants render? Okay, so this is something I teach in my courses just as a reminder, you know all these things, but so there's primary production. Everybody knows about this. Food for humans, feed for animals, fibers, oils, building materials, ornamentals, fragrances, pigments, medicines, etc. But there's a zillion ecosystem services that we render when we culture plants or we destroy because we're not making sure that the plants are assuring these. So soil fertility, soil stability, plants on a slope are really important to help, landslides, to fight against landslides. Soil permeability, how far the roots go down into the soil, help renew the water table. In some of our crops, the depth of their roots now is too short. They've been developed to be a little bit too short. Of course, we have carbon fixation, carbon dioxide fixation, and oxygen production. Without plants, we would not have any oxygen to breathe. Evapotranspiration. So that is the water cycle, which brings also cooling and then shade. Plants produce volatile organic compounds, which some of them are insect signaling molecules or plant signaling molecules. Some are active in making cloud aerosols because they help water to condense, water vapor to condense. And there's this idea that large swaths of plants can, in fact, help generate winds. Okay, so there's really important ecological services that can't just be ignored. But I think most of the people who are working with veterinary sciences and plant sciences, veterinary sciences and medical sciences, only understand the primary production. They don't understand the ecosystem services. So if you want more details about that, I'm not going to talk too much more about all that history. You can see it in this paper we wrote on this. It's called More Than Food, right? Why restoring, so plants are more than food. Why restoring the cycle of organic matter in sustainable plant production is essential for the One Health nexus. So I'm going to go on a little bit more about now why you have to restore this cycle, okay? Why it's important for One Health, however you want to define One Health. Okay, so more and more soils are recognized as central hub of plant animal, and human health. So this is just an example from research that I found in the literature where they listed the functions of soil-borne microorganisms. So these are organisms that either live in the soil or they're transiting through the soil. Okay. So of course we have plant pathogens. We have microorganisms that promote plant growth, those that produce antibiotics, those that contribute to your gut health because you breathe them in with dust, or there are people who actually eat soils. Those are the people with low mineral content, they eat soils. We have basic soil functions, nutrient cycling. There are microbes that can mitigate the consequences of climate change, in particular by producing mucuses that help roots retain water around them. We have pathogens of animals and humans. And then there are, in fact, a little bit of research that shows some of these microorganisms, when they get in our gut, um, can also influence social behaviors because of the signaling molecules that they produce, and they can actually influence making animals more or less sociable. So this is extremely interesting. So what's critical here is that these organisms and the presence of their functions can be managed via soil quality. Okay. Okay, and this is where soil science is very important. Soil microbiology is important. But for all of them, when I read the literature, organic matter is key to them assuring these ecosystem services. So what does organic matter do? Organic matter generally gives structure to the soil, and that's what allows it to not be compacted, allows it to breathe, allows there to be exchanges and everything. It's not so much that the organic matter is a source of nutrients for these organisms. It contributes to the soil structure, which is extremely important, and it's why it can't really be replaced by synthetic nitrogen or phosphorus or whatever NPKs that you put in. Okay, so this is what's overriding in the literature. So many articles about the importance of this organic matter for all these for soils to function well. And so if you look at the action plan for One Health that was published by the World Health Organization, United Nations, and FAO in 2022, one of the most recent ones, I scanned it for the word soil. I mean, it's just not there. They don't even account for it. Okay, it's not on the horizon yet. Okay, and so this is where the battle starts. The battle. We have to raise our voices and we have to show examples and help people be aware that this soil management is really important for everybody's health, not just crop production. And so, like I said before, modern agriculture practices have robbed soil of organic matter principally. And this problem was acknowledged as far back as the 1980s by Eustace van Liebig, etc. And in that paper, I said that, suggested that you look at what we really point the finger to is we need to reduce this fixation of atmospheric nitrogen by the Haber-Bosch process and production of synthetic fertilizers, which is on the left of that circle. And we really need to restore this green cycle, or it's green in there. I don't know if it's actually probably brown cycle, but in my graph it's green, where you take your food and you feed, which become then excrements, and via composting, all right, rather than dumping it out into rivers or figuring out what to do with it and having it become a pollution that accumulates, we need to use composting and other techniques that will allow us to then safely put it back into the soils. And this is where we need approaches in, civil and environmental sanitation engineers, legislation and quality control procedures. We need better biodiversity management, so crop production specialists, plant pathologists, and microbial ecologists who can help to see, what's going on. Are we respecting safety, but also are we also ensuring the functions that should be there in the soil, but all through the incorporation of organic matter. And this is so, so, so important because if you look at the Stockholm Resilience Center, they have defined planetary boundaries within which humanity can continue to develop and thrive. So they've identified 9 boundaries, and we've already crossed 6. And I think maybe we've even crossed more. You can go to their website and see. But among those that we've crossed are the amount of the nitrogen and phosphorus biogeochemical flows. And so today, technically, there is enough um, bioavailable, or we'll say we'll say fixed nitrogen. So nitrogen is not doesn't have three chemical bonds and is not usable by biology. Um, bioavailable nitrogen currently available now on Earth, sufficient for our needs. Okay, and the more we fix atmospheric nitrogen by Haber-Bosch process and by, maybe you don't want to hear this, production of leguminous crops, because that's what they do, okay? And with leguminous crops are often used as a way to assure soil fertility, but you have to keep in mind that, okay, they're an important alternative to meat, etc., but they can be exacerbating this surplus of nitrogen problem. We don't need to fix any more nitrogen. We need to just be able to get the nitrogen that we have back to where it's needed. Okay. And so it's likewise for phosphorus. And so this is where the recycling of organic matter is extremely, extremely important. So plant sciences, the role of plant sciences and production specialists is really important in this overall One Health concept because we, you, are stewards of the soil. It's not a veterinarian. It's not a medical doctor. They're not going to be paying attention to the soil. They don't have the competence. It's not within their scope of activities. It's us. Okay. And so this is why the role for all health of all organisms is key. All right. And even more so because if you look at land cover today, here's this graph. So you have in 1700, what was the amount of crops versus wild plants versus semi-natural plants? And you go to 2000 and beyond, more than half of land cover now is managed land that we are managing, not natural lands. So we're deciding how is it fertilized? How is it tilled if it's tilled? What's planted there? Okay. And this is a very, very big unintended geoengineering experiment. Okay. Where, people are against geoengineering, but we're doing it anyway. So, but nobody calls agriculture geoengineering, right? So, but I mean, we're a huge, huge change of how we use the land and what kind of vegetation is on the land, and then hence what is being done to the soils, if anything. All right. So, in summary, what I want to say is that farmers, foresters, and others who cultivate and manage vegetation are really well positioned to be stewards of soil. Okay. And this soil stewardship is not within the realm of competence of veterinary and human medicine. So, I mean, it's not their fault. They just don't know how. Unfortunately, they don't maybe don't want to recognize our competence, but that's another thing. And without soil stewardship that's based on restoring and maintaining organic matter from existing sources, can there be One Health? Okay, that's so my what we said in this paper is as much as people think that they can do One Health, I think it's unattainable without taking care of the soil. And so how can you assure that this goal is met? Okay, so I leave you with this lovely picture of Eve Balfour in 1943 on her tractor, saying that the health of soil, plant, animal, and man is one and indivisible. So maybe with that, we can start questions, keeping in mind that I have some extra images, maybe if Carl
Oh,
has
for
a
sure.
chance to.
Yeah, Carl, if
Okay.
so you say Carl might have some images. Carl, do you mind? I might promote you to panelist. That way you could hop on and share. So Carl, it's gonna kick you out, and then your inbox you'll have a panelist invite, and so you'll just re click that link, and then you'll hop back in as a panelist. So hopefully
So
you
should I just leave my slides up for
yeah,
now
you can
then,
leave it up for
or
now,
what?
or we could. We can cut it whenever. Oof. I mean, there's so many amazing things to unpack there. I mean, I love it's so amazing getting an interview, an overview of kind of the history of like fertilizers and biology and like plant use kind of since the early 1800s because we kind of forget about that between then and the Green Revolution. Yeah, I read that book, The Wizard and the Prophet. It was a really fantastic
It's
read.
every person in plant sciences should read that book. I mean,
Yeah,
I sent it to
absolutely.
the director of my institute. I said, you got to read this book.
And right now it's so interesting. A lot of people, like I've heard some ideas that even like the kind of the hybrid wheat that Borlaug designed, it might be related to some of the issues with people that have wheat besides just glyphosate. That because of the it's like it's not the original European strains or the because of
Well,
the
you mean in terms of gluten?
yeah in terms of gluten that
Well, that's a whole
somehow
nother story. I mean, that's
yeah
don't you want to get me going on food? I mean, because I've also written papers on human nutrition.
oh
That's a whole nother story. So
well I mean
yes,
that's one of the
it's
most
not just his wheat. It's
yeah
just any wheat that needs to have hold carbon dioxide molecules in it as it expands. And gluten is a
mm,
stretchy protein. And of course, the gluten levels in all modern wheats are off the charts.
for sure.
But not just his wheat. It's all wheat,
Well, I
all bread
guess
wheat, all bread BRED wheat that was breeded. Yeah.
for
So
sure.
Carl, do you want to add a few remarks about your own property? I can advance the slides.
Sure, sure. Yeah. Like a lot of people who grew up in the 60s and came of age in the 60s, I've read a lot of the books that you've actually and touched on in this talk. And about 35 years ago, we moved to a forest in northern New Mexico that had been basically logged off 110, 20 years ago and then neglected. And also overgrazed at the same time, massively overgrazed with sheep and whatnot. And so the soils had been massively depleted, but also, if you look at the photo on the right there, the trees are way too tight together. So all the trees are competing with each other for sunlight and nutrients. I could write a check to a wildlife, save the whales kind of thing, or another nature conservancy sort of organization. But I also can be a boots on the ground and go into our own forest and look at it and go, what's wrong with this picture? And you can see on the right, these trees are 60, 70 years old and they're all competing with each other. What we have done in the last 30 years is thin the forest. And then over that time, I felt my job was to educate myself and to pay attention and observe what's going on in the forest and specifically the soils in the forest. And in fact, Raleigh, you'll enjoy this. Dr. Elaine Ingham's Soil Food Web webinars did a lot of educating for me in how the soil works. And also, I've been a mushroom forager for many, many decades. So I also read Paul Stamets, on Mycelium Running, and did a lot of studying on what are these mushrooms, where do they come from? What are they doing in the soil? And so when you thin a forest, you produce a lot of biomass, which is from a foresting standpoint is they look at that as fuel, and they say you got to get rid of that fuel because it'll contribute to a risk for forest fires. And so what I did, following Paul Stamets' example, is I bought a chipper and we chip the slash, and we have a lot of patches in the forest that are bare mineral soil from that overgrazing.
So that
Um, there is a slide with just to give you an example of how bare mineral soil it is. There on the right side, you see that's bare mineral soil, and that has been that way for 20, 30 years and before, actually. It never changes because the sun bakes it, the rainfall comes and compacts that soil and washes away any organic matter. And there's nothing to change that. So my job was to introduce something to change that dynamic. And so on the photo on the left there, you'll see we added chips just to cover that bare mineral soil. It cools the soil. It makes that soil more absorbent for moisture. It also retains the moisture longer. And when you do that, I've observed the soil knows what to do. It has the bacteria and the microorganisms and the fungi in the soil that leaps into those chips and starts to change that dynamic. If you look at the picture on the left, you'll see little mushrooms. I
Mhm.
believe those are saprophytic mushrooms. They're the decayers, helping to transform those chips into nutrients that then you see the green matter starting to grow, the little ground cover starting to grow. And that's just a successional process that goes on. All the work we do, you have to add time to it and not be expecting um, results right away. But in time, if you go to that next group of slides, um, the bounty from the soil is pretty interesting. That next group of slides, with
Yep. Yeah, I just have this.
yeah, there you
Did you
go.
see it? Yeah,
On the
okay.
upper left-hand corner, what you see there is a chipping that was done with an industrial chipper of wood chips. And if you add 12 years of just sitting on the soil, you'll see in the picture on the upper right that those wood chips have turned into what you would have to call some sort of organic soil mixture, humus, and what we've noticed over time is we have mycorrhizal mushrooms as well as saprophytic mushrooms have really benefited. The mycelium's in the soil, and if they have enough nutrients from the trees and from this organic matter, they have enough energy to put up fruiting bodies, which is the mushroom. And you'll see this is the mushrooms on the lower picture are Boletus barosi. That's the porcini, white porcini, and that's a mycorrhizal mushroom associated with ponderosa pine, very delicious. And the lower mushrooms are Agaricus silvicola,
Agaricus.
which is a saprophytic mushroom, delicious. But the point is we've noticed an uptick in abundance and both species abundance and just amount of abundance in our particular little swath of forest because we opened up the forest, we've added organic matter to the soil and sort of jump-started the natural processes of the forest soil. And of course, we get to enjoy this. This was the result of a very short, quick walk in the forest. Um, it pays off in many, many ways, and wildlife also benefits. You know, I was wondering why, and when it comes to a regenerative agriculture, people talk about farmers and ranchers, but you don't often hear about it in the realm of forestry. So I thought I'd apply the regenerative agriculture principles to forestry. And the number one principle is keep bare mineral soil covered and not to compact and disturb soils, and then to, uh, support biodiversity. So all of those principles, and also to support wildlife or livestock, all those principles I've tried to incorporate into our forest management practices. And we've been doing that now for 25 plus years. And over that time, you can see the results.
That's awesome.
It's fantastic,
Thanks.
Carl. Yeah. What state was this done
This
in?
is in northern New Mexico. And I
Oh, New
might add,
Mexico. Wow, cool.
all these
Yeah.
practices we've been engaged in during the most historic drought,
Hmm.
20 years plus of incredibly dry. And the last 4 or 5 years have been some of the driest years on record. And yet, our soils have benefited from our practices and continue to benefit. Yeah, I can only imagine what it would have been like if we had more moisture.
Oh yeah.
It's really cool you share this story. I've seen the similar dynamic play out. My parents live in Evergreen, Colorado. It's this area where, extreme fire risk because there's a lot of pine beetle kill there. And in this area, the forest right near their house, it's called the Peaks, but anyway, there was all these pine beetle kill, and the park department decided to fell a lot of dead trees, but also masticate them and basically turn it back into a meadow where it was like a thin forest and meadow dynamic. And so over 7 years, I got to see how it changed from originally crowded, dead forest. And these were all dead tree stands, and they masticated it, turned it basically into a giant blanket of wood chips. And over 7 years, watching the meadow grasses pop back up. And of course, elk would be there, like elk herds would swoop in, goats, deer, all that dynamic was there. But just seeing it naturally repair itself with bunch grasses and like fungi would really show up year after year and see the ecosystem repair itself and go from like this kind of monoculture dead forest back to kind of this mixed meadow. But one
Absolutely.
thing that they didn't even use things like tools like compost or compost extract that could have pushed that succession along. So I would love to find someone who's doing that approach where it's like this, where you're mulching and helping that forest recover, but also increasing the speed of recovery with biology. Maybe that'd be a topic I would love to dive in deeper and find a practitioner doing that.
Yeah, that'd be really cool.
Yeah. Well, there's a few questions here. Nicholas had two questions. And Nicholas, if you want to say your questions live, just raise your hand. Oh, there we go. I'm gonna let you speak here. And yeah, would love to hear your questions with your
Hello.
voice. Hey, Nicholas.
Hello, Nicholas.
Hi, how are you doing? I had two two questions, one for each. And maybe I should start from the one that you were just discussing. Um, Raleigh. I mean, probably, the point is to increase organic matter with everything else that comes, biology, nutrients, etc., etc., etc. So, a way I was just pointing out that in syntropic farming or the Miyawaki method, because it was mentioned that the trees were competing each other. They were for two reasons, mainly because it's a monoculture, and second, because the soil has been depleted. So I'm just saying that I use these practices, and many other people do as well. It's just becoming more popular, but growing our own biomass and then with very dense planting of a huge diversity of plants in different strata, that gives us a lot of biomass, continuing the practice that you were talking about before, of course, pruning, mulching. Uh, what I also do is all this mulch, the biology is coming, but if you bring it, especially fungi can take their time. If you actually bring a lot of inoculated logs and wood chips, and you throw millions, billions of spores, then that happens much, much faster. And the faster you do that, the faster the trees and all the plants are going to grow, and you keep on pruning, etc. So this can really accelerate it even more, the process you are describing. Now, I don't know if you want to comment on that, or I should uh, ask for the other questions about nitrogen in soil.
Well, just I can just say a remark about what you suggest. Basically, you just add your inoculum of the organisms that you want, and you hope that they survive and multiply. Is that
No,
what
no.
you're proposing?
I what I do is basically inoculate uh, big bunches of wood chips, uh, throw a lot of seeds, a lot of spores on the wood chips as well.
Yeah.
Let these grow, do fungal compost, and also bury inoculated logs. You know they're gonna.
Yeah. So where do you get your inoculum from? You make it?
So, well, I make it, but I get a lot of spores from a plant of mushroom growing, saprotrophic
Yeah.
mainly, because in their filters you can get kilos of spores. Uh,
Ah,
so
okay. Yeah,
uh,
okay.
yeah,
And so you
there
had a
is
question
the
about nitrogen also?
about nitrogen. You mentioned that we have enough nitrogen, and the only we shouldn't be using adding more. My question is, if the leguminous plants they mainly bring, that's what I understand, that they mainly bring the fixed nitrogen to their seeds that we then consume or animals consume. Is it because of that that afterwards they become manure or human manure
No,
and they,
the nitrogen is in their nodules in the roots.
yes, but I
Okay.
mean it is, but
And,
eventually
and
if
then
you let
then they
them
use
continue.
that as a reservoir for their
Mhm,
source of nitrogen.
exactly. But so eventually they most of this nitrogen will end up in the seeds, right?
Both, because when if you ever pull a leguminous crop out of the soil, there are tons of nodules even at harvest. Okay, so you have both. You have what goes into the plant, the edible parts or even the leaves, and then you still have the reservoirs in the roots.
Which you say that a lot of it is released in the soil,
Yeah, yeah.
bringing it
Yeah.
even
So
worse.
again, I mean, I'm giving you some information that I read. I'm not giving you an opinion about the fact that we shouldn't cultivate um, uh, leguminous, but you need to know that it's part of the overall
Yes.
burden of nitrogen for the planet. These things that have a positive image do have some negative impacts.
Hmm. Okay.
So
Thank
yeah,
you.
they all a lot of their nitrogen is
Mhm.
released into the soil because they fix much more than they need.
Okay. Yeah. Well, the important thing is, of course, this nitrogen to become biological nitrogen, right? I mean,
Well, then it becomes bioavailable,
mhm,
and then it contributes, but it's an added on bioavailable nitrogen to what
yeah.
is already available on a planetary scale.
Hmm.
Again, a difficulty with this analysis is that we're talking about global amounts on the planet, but we're not talking about
Of
distribution. I
course.
mean, it might not be where it's needed,
Of
all this
course. Of
nitrogen.
course.
But
Of
what
course.
happens is then a lot of this excess nitrogen is run off into waters. You have eutrophication of waters. This is a big problem. Okay.
Of course. Okay. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Nicholas. Okay, so I just made made a slideshow of the like in the timbers and evergreen, their approach to how they kind of restore this area kind of post wildfire or to prevent a wildfire. Let me just share this real quick. All right, so I'm going to share my photos. So this was Evergreen. Can everybody see this all right? So this
It's
is
coming, yeah.
Evergreen 2018. This is, I'll give you the view from, so where my folks live, they're looking after this big tree line here. And this used to be completely filled with, um, oh, weird. Wonder why I can't go back. Anyway, so dead trees, right? So this was pretty much, it felt like when walking around here, it was almost like 70% dead trees, like just as far as you go, like lots of dead trees. Now at the top, there's a lot of living trees, but if you go, it's thick. It's completely thick, filled with dead trees that if a wildfire came through here, they were really scared that it would just rip through and just burn down the surrounding community. And so they were like, okay, what is our challenge here? How do we prevent wildfire, but also kind of leave a positive ecological impact? So the timber solution basically was to come in, masticate a lot of this down into wood chips. And so this is a view of, you see where the old approach was,
Wow.
it's a lot of trees, but this new approach is they masticated it, and this is not adding biology. There's not even compost here. This is just natural over a few years, seeing how naturally the meadow is coming back and it's bunch grasses. And these are just kind of naturally coming back. And you're seeing how the kind of succession is happening in these areas where we used to be kind of dead forest where they're kind of creating these meadows. And so it's this really cool mix of succession planning in these areas that, might be overcrowded with dead pine beetle kill trees. And now with successional planning, it's like it's meadow grasses. That's my dog Django.
Yeah. So
Um,
can I ask a question? How were
yes.
they masticated?
They basically have a big, excavator with a masticator arm attachment, and they're just going to dead trees, and it goes, "Zhink," and it
That
basically
runs on
turns it into
diesel?
wood chips. Yeah, it's diesel, but to do this on a large enough scale, you got to use machinery because
Yeah,
they
that's
can
right.
cut a tree down, and then you could leave it as dead trees, but to turn it into chips, it's the fastest way that they could do that especially when there's hundreds of trees. Like granted, like what else could they do? Oh, they could chip it, turn it into biochar, and mix that with compost and reapply it to the forest. But this is just with the chips and mastication. This
Yeah,
wasn't
that's
doing
great.
any additional biology. But this is just one thing where I see this could be
Huh,
an interesting approach to protecting areas against wildfire where there's
right.
thousands of acres of dead trees,
Dead trees, yeah.
you
So
know.
I think looks like Carl has another question or a remark
Yeah,
to add.
sure. Here, I'll stop sharing my screen here. Boop. Yeah,
Was
Yeah,
Carl?
that you, Carl?
can I butt in there a little bit?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, one of my roles in our community is going to various meetings with our local foresters who are federal foresters as well as state foresters, and advocating for techniques that it's not what they would. How can I say this? How they reach for the same set of tools a lot. And one of the things is they a lot of these foresters come from the background of forest fighters. That's one of the things their roles they play.
Mhm,
So they go into a forest and they start identifying everything that's organic as fuel.
mhm,
And I've had I can't tell you how many discussions about chipping or masticating, and they go, you're just rearranging the fuel.
hmm.
And I say, You have to give it time."
Yeah, yeah.
They'll come in, 6 weeks after a mastication or chipping and go, this is just fuel. That could actually be a problem. And I say, you have to give it not 6 weeks, give it 6 years, you
Yep.
know, and they don't have that vision. And I understand their worry about a fire coming in this year.
Yeah.
But so I'm constantly trying to advocate for the understanding of the soil and getting the organic matter in intimate contact with the soil and what it can do.
Well, if
Uh,
it's people scared about fire, like the dynamics, if it's this extremely crowded forest, but then there's a buffer of meadows or
that's
just
right.
like trees that are widely spaced and healthy, like aspens. If it's like aspens are not going to just explode into flames compared like groves of aspens compared to pine beetle kill. And of course, like these areas also have to have defensible space. But
But if you
I,
remove all the soil from all
oh
the
my God, it's
organic matter,
horrible. Yeah,
you
what's
remove all
left?
the organic matter from the
Nothing.
soil by burning everything,
Yeah.
then you dry out the soils. And here again, you don't have that buffer.
Mhm.
And so it's a balancing. Everything's a balancing act.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we need a new, like, a whole approach. Should launch a whole summit on approaches to how make areas more resilient to wildfire and boost the ecology and kind of like, yeah, how do you approach this world of wildfire we're living in? Because it's super important. And like Cindy was saying, the excess nitrogen also, that's another huge component. Like I saw that in Iowa, you could not swim in the lakes in summer because of all the runoff. It's one of the
Oh, yeah, it's
planetary
dangerous.
boundaries we have totally crossed. So there's a
So
few more questions here. Go ahead,
yeah,
Cindy.
there's two questions in the
Yeah.
chat that address the question of the economics of crop production,
Mhm.
agriculture, and the limits of adopting these practices for farmers. And so one of them is, can farmers really do this? And it'll fall by the wayside because as organic farming in the UK and stuff has done. And so this is really important question because I have to plug in my battery just a second. My computer's gonna break down. Okay, there we go. Um, this is a very important question, and often farmers will say, "Oh, that's going to cost us so much, or it's going to be so much work." And this is where the social scientists and economists are extremely important, as well as the technological innovators, because we need to find ways to make these practices easier, to give financial incentives to do it, to have the markets want them. Okay. Now, in the US, the way that agricultural modifications are made, I'm talking about pre the last since January, before January this year. Okay. The way things worked in the past was the market forces pushed. But in Europe, what's happening is that Europe decided by 2050, no more pesticides. Okay. So legally, they're going to try to do it. And to do that, they have to invest in research because we can't make that transition tomorrow. And so, in order for this adoption to take place, we can't just expect farmers to decide to practice to do it differently tomorrow. They can't. They can't be the burden of the cost because, like the first question addressed, they're getting shortchanged. Okay, they're because of all the intermediaries and who they sell to, they're getting such little return on their investment. It has to be a long-term goal where there's investment in research and investment in helping people with technology innovations or with practical innovations, get them out to people, have them be accessible. And this is not, it's not overnight. And that's why we have to talk about it all the time. That's why we have to exchange ideas and go by the practices that farmers can do. But there are a lot of farmers who do want to do this. Okay. And there are more and more consumers who, I think people understand that today the rates of cancer in the population that are my children are much higher than in my generation and in my parents' generation. Why? Because of exposure to pesticides. And I think this is becoming a well-known fact, all right, that the rates of cancer for people in their 40s today are amazingly high compared to my generation and my father's generation. It's just unheard of. And it is mostly due to the exposure we have to all these nasty chemicals, of which one most importantly is pesticides. And so this can be a driving factor for consumers to put pressure on having availability of products that are produced by in certain ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's been kind of the purpose of so many webinars we've done with Dr. Elaine Ingham and people using compost and soil biology and extract is how do you solve the problem of excess fertilizers, chemicals, pesticides, herbicides,
Yeah,
insecticides that are poisoning our bodies and replacing it with just soil biology.
that's right.
We actually have a webinar coming up with a European soil consultant who did a lot of trials, and he's going to share his data, Juan de la Silva, where he was using it on large scale row crops, just using soil biology. And he's going to share his data where he's seeing large increases in yield without any chemical use. So that'll be a fun case study that we're going to show. That's going to come up
Yeah.
in May.
And so I've been to
Really cool.
Iceland multiple times for my research, and
Mhm.
Iceland, like 1% of their land surface is agriculture. They're
Wow.
not producers, they're just starting. And I talked to some people that I said, now is the time to do one of these population studies like they did in Luxembourg, get everybody's blood sample and measure your levels of pesticides, because I bet you guys don't have any right now. Okay, they're importing foods, they import foods, but overall they're not exposed to the environmental residues. And so it'd be fascinating to have a marker because with climate change, of course, they're going to have more and more agriculture and they're already starting to produce barley and they're already starting to spray pesticides. So it'd be really fascinating to show today there are still people in the world who have low exposure. I don't know. I mean, I'm just guessing that they would because right now they're not surrounded by agriculture. And it's really sad to think that by producing crop, anybody's a gardener, you think, I mean, no, that shouldn't be a dangerous hobby, right? But food production, I mean, you live around food production. I have colleagues who don't want to buy a new house because the neighbor is an apple producer. Apples receive the highest rates of pesticide application over a 6-month period. They don't want to live next to that.
That's crazy. I mean,
Yeah, it's crazy. So I think there will be growing pressure, but it's not
well, look
going to
at Bayer's lost hundreds of millions of dollars to lawsuits about glyphosate. It's only a matter of time. And there's even rumors they
Yeah,
might
yeah,
could face bankruptcy because of those lawsuits. And that's it's a great indicator.
yeah.
But I'm gonna get political here for a second. I know like Robert F. Kennedy's all about, oh, make America healthy. And yet he's like, oh, we want to stop this chemical exposure that to reverse this trend of autism. And yet the Trump administration is also taking out any chemical controls to stop fertilizer and pesticide use. So it's like, can you really meet those
Yeah,
at the
it's
same
pointless to talk
time?
about what's going on in the US because there's zero
Oh
logic.
my
I mean,
God. It's yeah,
and it's
there's
not based on
insanity
any
here.
knowledge at all. And I just,
And they
it's
cut
like,
a lot
it's
of
too frustrating.
that's a whole yeah, it's a whole other
Yeah, I
topic.
mean,
But
it's just I think they're just gonna like it's a shake and bake, and eventually the sack's gonna break, and they'll go on to something else. It's just
for
like,
sure. Well, okay, so do we Cindy, did we get to Rosie's question? Did we she
I'm not
said here
sure,
in the
Rose.
UK, there's little recognition of the importance of microbes, and I worry that regen farming won't be widely adopted because yields will be low without microbe farmings won't be able to
Yeah, that's the question I was addressing. The
Oh, my
fact
bad.
that
Okay.
farmers not going to adopt. She said farmers might not adopt it, and I would
Yeah.
say they need to be helped to adopt it. We can't
Yeah.
just say, oh, they're not going to do it, so we're not going to stop. No, we have to really work to do that via all kinds of incentives.
Yeah. Well, I think now there's so many case studies where you could show that, hey, farmers have saved money doing this on all sorts of scales, large, small, like York Farms, Illinois with Todd Harrington, able to save, tens of thousands, like an enormous amount, like 15%. Trying to get the numbers right, but they were able to save millions cumulatively by cutting their chemical use because they're dealing with tens of thousands of acres by just kind of slowly switching the soil biology. And that's a huge amount of savings and increase and they're cutting the chemicals at the same time. And they're showing the same things in the UK, Europe. It's just there's going to be lots of case studies that people need to collect that hopefully will change into incentives. Okay, Rosie, I'm gonna let you
Rosie
talk
raised her
here.
hand.
Yeah.
Rosie.
Hey, Rosie.
My daughter's name is Rose, so.
Oh, thank you. So, um, so just leading from what you just said, I understand that individual farmers may be able to maintain profitability, but can they also produce the yields that are produced by conventional farming if they're using microbes? Because we need both. They need to be profitable, and we still need those high yields.
Yeah, that's a lot of case study. They didn't have any decrease in yields by using soil biology. Granted, some, cutting chemicals was almost like for a year or two, it was almost like they were addicted to fertilizers. It was cutting back on that and switching to all biology, but eventually it met and then eventually surpassed a lot of the based, fertilizer based crops. So
Yeah, I've seen similar studies that
yeah,
there are ways to maintain the yield and long term, on long term.
yeah.
Well, that's really good to know. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, reach out to me. Could give you some case study videos about it because there's been several done where they've shown that.
Maybe profit capitalism is a dead end.
No.
What did Marx say? You need I
I
mean,
think
he
so.
was a famous capitalist, right? Karl Marx.
Mhm.
Kevin, of course, nitrogen is maintained and becomes bioavailable this way. Wait, I'm missing something.
Well, here's Kevin saying Dr.
Oh,
James
okay.
White talks about.
Answering to Kevin above. Okay. Yeah.
Well,
No,
does
so
it?
Kevin said, you have to understand that I think Kevin said that it's the synthetic fertilizers that contribute most to nitrogen excess. Yes, I agree. But I just want to say legumes do it also, and it's smaller, but it's surprising that it's mentioned in the literature. So
Yeah.
need to do your balance, your budget sheet, and assess how much it contributes. Because there's this tendency to say, save the planet, we shouldn't be eating meat, right? What are we going to eat if we don't eat meat, right? So legumes, there would be an increase in production of legumes also. And so anybody else have questions?
Oh, sorry, I was muted. If anybody else, please raise your hand. Would love to do any more live questions because this is a great opportunity to get your question answered live. That would be fantastic. And while we're waiting for that, I'm going to repost
How
Cindy's.
about I ask a question to the audience? Why are you
Yeah,
here? What's your motivation?
there we
Why do you
go.
like this organization? And what do you hope to achieve personally?
Well, and Deer says, I would also like to have some references on profitability and yields with soil biology. I have a regenerative farm here in Costa Rica. For sure, I could supply those to you.
Okay.
But yeah, why are you folks here? Did you do you guys all come from like Cindy's original webinar on rainfall
Or mostly
science?
for not just for me, but I mean in
Oh,
general for
sure.
the
Yeah,
series of
why?
seminars you have.
Mhm,
I'm not looking for input about why you came to listen to me so
mhm.
much, but why do you do the soil thing? Does anyone want to
Well, for
say
me
anything about
personally,
yourself?
I look at areas like, to me, Colorado, where people fear they might not be able to ever live there ever again because of wildfire risk. I see a soil biology being the way that we could create a ecological buffer zone that allows people to live there and have solutions to have a safe relationship with fire. And one, I see it replacing the paradigm of excessive fertilizers and chemical use is basically poisoning our whole agricultural centers. And I've seen this play out with the people I've had on webinars, and seeing these projects in person has proved to me, like with these projects, that it is possible. And of course, I hope I've done my job of providing case studies for people that shows them that they can replace chemicals, herbicides, and pesticides with soil biology approaches
So
and
Robert says he's
compost.
working on a PhD in sustainability.
Oh, cool.
So where are you doing that, Robert? You want to give more details
Yeah, please raise your hand. We'd love to hear a bit more
or
about
speak?
that. And dear, okay, yeah, let me unmute Roberto here.
We're trying to promote soil
There we
biology. So
go. Hey,
Roberto, yeah,
Roberto.
where's he? Oh, he's working on a boat. Okay.
He's on a boat.
So,
Hello,
Roberto, where are you
hello.
doing your PhD?
I'm doing it with the Ubiquity University, which is primarily online. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's Jim Garrison is the founder. And it's basically quite a unique setting because they don't just want objective result or work, but subjective as well. So they want to know how you grow through your PhD, what your thoughts are. So it's a much more integrated approach to a PhD, and they do masters as well. And it's also in collaboration with Gaia Education. So the foundational work is provided by Gaia Education.
Gaia Education?
Yes, correct. So ubiquityuniversity.org, I believe, is the website, and they do a lot more with wisdom and other, psychedelic research and all this kind of stuff, but also sustainability.
And so your PhD in sustainability, do you have like a more specific topic than that?
It's actually I'm looking at the what the systems are, the planetary systems, how nature functions. Like your initial webinar, you spoke about the rain and the bacteria that causes the crystallization and not the crystallization, but the attraction of, and then how it compares to aerosol, the geoengineering and so forth. So if we know all of these, how should I say? How actually nature functions, like a water cycle, all of these different dynamics, then if sustainability can only come from the understanding those systems. So my idea is to understand as much as possible of how the planetary dynamics are, and then how we can coexist with that. So it basically would rule out, let's say, chemical agriculture, because actually, Blekinge Institute of Technology, which is in Sweden, the BTH, has a great definition of sustainability, and they have basically 8 sustainability principles, of which the first 3 are to do with the physical environment, and the latter 5 are to do with the person, the sustainability of the person, right to, you know, I can actually find a snippet of that and post it in the chat. But so yeah, it's still an early journey, but in a way, we're looking at, or I'm looking at, function and metabolisms, and how can we duplicate our action in the way nature functions. That's the whole, I guess, part of the
Sounds really
objective of that.
interesting. Sounds really interesting.
Yeah,
Good luck.
thanks. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for all your work. And Riley, it's great to see you again. I've been a sustainable this design masterclass advocate for many, many years, so it's always good to see you.
Well, appreciate you tuning in, Roberto. I think the next step of what we're doing, I'm partnering with Andrew Millison. We're going to do kind of a show, like a video
Yeah,
podcast. So that'll be fun. I'm going to help him
he's
set up
brilliant.
yeah,
He's brilliant.
we're gonna do like a live
Absolutely.
video podcast. We're gonna be like having videos live and doing live design. So that'll be fun. I'll announce that. But also
Excellent. Okay.
we've got
Looking
Compost
forward to that.
Academy and of course water stories happening too. But thanks,
Yep.
Yeah.
Roberto. Appreciate you tuning in.
Welcome.
All right.
Likewise.
So here we go. Here's some good answers. So Kevin says, he's like finding solutions for agriculture to alleviate the pressures on our waterways and the cycle as a whole. Have been following Raleigh for a few years now. Appreciate it. Especially if you've been tuning in since when Neil was doing the webinars too. Yeah, hopefully we've showed you ways out of this problem we're dealing with. So Shauna, what is the name of your PhD program? What
It was
email?
Ubiquity University, he said, but
Ubiquity
maybe
University.
Roberto can write that in the chat.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
Practicing regenerative agriculture on syntropic permaculture in a central city urban environment, always wanting to learn more on. First, may I run a community workshop to put a small huggle garden in the street side garden plots I've established in Berlin. Well, that's a good reason for me to go back to Berlin. Though, of course, now questioning whether I need to sow any leguminous seeds. Sure, you can. I mean, you're going to have what, 10 leguminous plants, of course, don't stop. I'm talking about large scale culture, okay? Possibly not given the biomass going into the beautiful beasts. But yeah, so this is great. I think this street side garden plots is really an awesome thing to do in cities.
Yeah, and waterways, I think rain gardens are they're so simple and they should be so ubiquitous for both like growing food and managing stormwater capture. Uh, that should be a solution everywhere where there's roadways. And it's
Yes. Now, interestingly, we had a seminar on this yesterday about the tendency for bluing and greening of cities. And so there's a real environmental motivation to do this, right? To fight the changes of climate change. But the thing that has to be paid attention to is creating habitat for vectors of human diseases. Malaria,
interesting.
Leishmania, dengue, chikungunya. And so when you have water, and especially standing water, and any water that can sit in one place for 1 or 2 days, you have mosquitoes. And so this is, I mean, it's important to have the green and the water for cooling, but you have to take care that it's not a reservoir for disease, for human disease and animal disease. So there's always a downside. Nature, I mean, think about it.
That's a huge question. We always get a water stories. Like people are like, what about mosquitoes? What about mosquitoes? I mean, a lot
So
of it
if your
is
water's moving,
filtration.
you're good. If your water is stagnant for more than the period of time that a mosquito can multiply, I think it's about 2 days, then you have to pay attention. You either have to use there are some biological products that are very effective, but you just need to assure that there's no stagnant water or it's really covered and there's no entrance for the mosquitoes, entrance and exits. But I mean, and you have fish. I have pond and you have to have fish that eat, the special fish that eat mosquitoes. And mine are very effective. I don't have any problem with mosquitoes in my pond.
Nice.
So sustainability.
Well, folks, do you have any? Oh yeah, and if anybody know, I posted the links to. I shared Dr. Morris's email for folks who want to get in touch with her directly, along with her ResearchGate page.
That email will be good for another year, and then I retire, and then
okay, well, get on it quick.
If you need.
She's gonna make use of her retirement, that's for sure.
And I just want to say to the people who are listening is that, I mean, last time the questions that I got and the sentiment that I could feel that people are really engaged and passionate is extremely motivating for me. And, not dragging my feet to work. I love what I do, but now that I really understand how many people out there are trying to implement things and trying to do at their level, that means you're talking to your neighbors and that you're influencing people around you. That is really meaningful to me and it's motivating. So thank you all. for that.
Well, maybe soon I'd love to reach out about, oh man, anything with maybe a workshop on like areas like Evergreen that are how do they help the process of rainfall along with the right kind of planting, the right kind of forestry methods that would support that. Like what could people be planting more, especially on a county level, that can help support the water cycle? That'd be really interesting,
Yeah,
especially.
these are more difficult. This is exactly what I was asked the last time. What
Mhm.
plants?
Sure.
And I think the best answer are indigenous plants that can survive. And
Right.
and then if you want plants that pump water, I mean
Mhm.
in Florida, the plant that pumps water in awesome ways is eucalyptus, but I don't think it's adapted to that situation.
Mhm.
So it's best to go with what survives and what it installs there and maximize diversity, because then you'll by luck you'll have a good combination of things that are constantly pumping and maybe constantly making vegetation. So those are not my areas of competence,
No problem.
but I might come up with another subject for another
Yeah.
seminar.
Well, that's always fascinating. This was a really great topic, and really like One Health. How ubiquitous is that? Like One Health, is that like a just part of the UN's
Huge.
food
It's
program?
huge.
Okay, so it's really.
Okay, so for example,
Mhm.
you probably all have heard of the debate about what is the origin of COVID. And there was that huge debate about did it originate from a lab in China or not? And one of the central actors in that debate is a guy named Peter Daszak, who who is a founder of an organization called Eco Health Alliance. And I was extremely inspired by his research because his whole research is about his history of his research is about the fact that human pathogens are emerging more and more as we deforestation, because we are creating an easier access and we have more contact with these animals that normally there was not the human animal contacts with bats and with chimpanzees and stuff. And so it's huge, huge. So they have there's many organizations and they're associated with the World Health Organization, FAO, UN. This One Health initiative is really, really huge because of the numerous diseases that we understand have importance because of how we're changing the planet. And I have a song on internet. I write songs, lyrics, and sing songs. And I wrote one about the zoonotic diseases, and it starts with you can hear this for a tree falling in the forest, the buzzsaw, the tree falling in the forest, and then you hear someone, trying to catch their breath. Well, Peter Daszak listened to that and he said, I could almost not get through that first part of the thing. It was so troubling for him because that's his research showed the link between deforestation and the emergence of a lot of these new diseases that we hadn't ever seen before. So it's a really huge initiative. So One Health, you hear about it if you are an epidemiologist. Bats transmit a huge amount of things.
Mm.
Okay.
Yeah.
1 in 4. So if you count all the mammals on the planet as individuals, 1 in 4 of them is a bat. 25% of all individuals, mammals, are bats. Huge. They render incredible services because they eat insects, but they also have an immune system like ours, which has the T cells and everything. And so a virus gets in there, they're more resistant, and viruses can sort of learn how to be pathogenic, but not really do damage to bats. And so that's why bats can be a big source of many, many viruses that suddenly emerge. Bite a horse, the horse starts sniffling in a stable, the horse sneezes on the stable workers and everybody in the stable, and all the horses die. This has happened in Australia, for example. Hendra.
Wow.
Yeah. And so these things are important.
That's wild.
So
Well,
that's why I'm
appreciate that
saying
answer.
soil quality is related to these questions, is
Mhm.
absolutely related to these questions.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's part of the holistic, needs to be part of a holistic approach
Right.
there.
That's right.
All right, Sandra's saying, thanks for the answer before. Lupin, Svetch, and others will now be for sure be going into that Berlin Hugelbett Awesome. Appreciate Sandy. And also, Sandra, there's a film things view for free on the Water Source community about Sepp Holzer. It's a 25-minute documentary we made. There's not a lot of how-tos in it, unfortunately, but it's got a good perspective on Sepp Holzer's life. So if you want to view that, that's on the Water Stories community. Well, folks, we've almost hit the hour and a half mark. I feel like, all right, my dog yelling in the background. If there's any other questions, we could do those. Otherwise, we could hit the end here, and then I'll follow up with a replay for everybody with more resources and the pages of Cindy along with her email. I just posted her YouTube link too with some of her really cool presentations and songs, so check that out. Kevin says, speaks to my soul, Cindy's trees falling being from Ireland. We are a forest people. Ireland currently 1% native tree cover. Oof.
Yeah, check out my songs on YouTube. I have a channel, and I have some. They're all about science, but the one about zoonotic diseases is a song to the. I don't write my own music. I just use existing songs to Adele's "Someone Like You," whatever that
Is it
song.
like the Zoonoses like me? Is
Yeah,
that
yeah, that's right.
one of those
Zoonosis like me. That's it. You can, if you want to put it there. That one's a killer. I mean, I the first time I sang it, I cried. I couldn't get to the end, but I really tried to sing it with emotion. I said, "How am I going to do this?" But anyway, so okay, yeah. Thanks. So thank you for inviting me, and keep going on, everybody. Cover your soils with mulch and get that organic matter in there, and help your neighbors figure out how to have dry toilets and get manure back into the regulation for being willing to recycle all kinds of manures is really important. So,
Well, thanks for
okay.
tuning in, everybody. Keep a
Okay.
lookout in your inbox, the replay, and catch everybody on the next one.
Yeah, and nice to see you again, Carl.
Oh yeah, thanks, Carl. Really appreciate your input. That was
Yeah.
really cool.
It was fun. Let's do it again.
All right,
Yes,
sounds
again.
good.
Okay.